Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's talk, Women Makers and Designers. My name is Roberta Watson, and I have the privilege of introducing our speaker this evening. I'm from the Office of Alumni Relations, and we're so excited to be with you celebrating International Women's Day and Women's History Month. Jade Papa will be our speaker this evening, and she's going to be giving us a look inside the textile and costumes collection, specifically some of the amazing items that we have from our women designers. So before we get started, a little bit about Jade. She oversees the textile and costumes collection at the Design Center on our East Falls campus and also serves as one of our professors. She will be sharing some amazing pieces during her presentation, and after she'll be answering some of your questions. So if you'd like to drop those in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, I encourage you to do so throughout tonight's talk, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jade. Go ahead and get us started. Thanks so much for being here, Jade. Go ahead, take it away.
Okay. All right, well, I first wanted to say thank you so much to everybody who's joining us tonight. I was watching the intro and seeing all the people from around the country that were here and in fact around the world. So I'm really, really pleased to be spending part of this evening with you. And I want to give a special thanks to Roberta and Alumni Relations in general for asking me to share more about the hidden treasure that is the textile and costume collection. So as Roberta said, I am the curator of that collection, and I'm also an adjunct faculty. And I teach classes on the history of clothing and textiles here at Jefferson. And what's so great about the classes that I'm able to teach is that I use the collection in those classes to sort of bring history to life through garments and through textiles. And before we jump into tonight's discussion, I thought I'd say just a few words about the textile and costume collection for those of you who might not be as familiar with the role it plays on our campus. So all of the garments, all of the textiles, all of the pieces, all the beautiful images that you're going to see tonight are ones that are housed in the textile and costume collection. And they're housed in a building called the Design Center, which is on the East Falls campus. And this building, which was built in 1955, was actually once a private residence. But after it was donated to the university, and this would have been in the late 1970s, it came to be the repository for this archive of stuff, these textile materials, these garments, student work, faculty work that had been growing, I think, from what I understand, since the university was founded in the late 19th century. And while we're not quite sure how many pieces, this is a question I often get asked, how many pieces we have over here at the Textile and Costume Collection, my current best guess is around 100,000 objects. That's a lot. That's kind of a head-spinning sort of number. And over the 5.5 years that I've been here, one of the projects that I've spearheaded is an inventory and a digitization of that collection, of those pieces. It's really hard for me to show students what we have if I myself don't know that it exists. And so actually at the end of the presentation this evening, I'm going to detail to you how you can access those nearly, and I'm happy to say our number is we've digitized about 6,000 of those pieces. And so I'm going to detail for you how you can access those digital archives online. So the oldest piece in our collection, and this comes from one of the questions that was submitted beforehand, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what other questions you might have at the end of our evening tonight. But the oldest piece that we have in our collection, and this is very exciting to me, it's just actually been verified via carbon-14 dating, is a piece from Egypt when it was ruled by the Byzantines. And this piece, this fragment, dates from around 234. Again, another number that's hard for me to wrap my head around. The most contemporary piece that we have in our collection is a dress that dates from probably around the early 1990s. And obviously there's a whole range of things in between those two. And what makes our collection, I think, unique is that it's a study collection, meaning that students, like the ones you're seeing in the images on this screen, our students have an opportunity to have a hands-on experience with this collection, which is different from your usual museum going experience where you are separated by the object, usually by plexiglass that's in between you. And I know, in fact, that there's great value in this up close and personal interaction with objects. Being able to touch them, it evokes this visceral response, and you see details that you might not have ever seen from a distance. So after a brief training in the do's and don'ts of how you handle an object, researchers, my students, can hold in their hands, for example, wood blocks, hand carved from the 19th century and used to print textiles, molas from Central America, or shoes from the 1920s. And I've got to tell you, for my money, it just doesn't get any better than that. And in allowing our students to interact with these objects, we're actually giving them the agency to uncover the stories that they're interested in learning from these objects. And it's these stories of time, place, changing technology, cultures and peoples that are different from our own, but in fact, when you dig into it, they're not always as different as you might have thought. And that's what makes this work that I get to do, so exciting to me. And because we have so many objects and so many things left uninventoried, it's almost on a daily basis that I'm opening boxes and finding things I've never seen before. I mean, it's like Christmas. I feel very fortunate to get to find all of these treasures and unbury them. And when I find those treasures, when I bring those things out to light, I'm really helping to bring those valuable stories back to life. And I can share them with people like you here this evening. And since, as Roberta mentioned, it's Women's History Month, and in fact, today it's International Women's Day. This evening, our stories are going to lean in that direction. And we're going to focus on the work of women in the world of textiles and fashion. And we're going to zero in on two women of the mid-20th century. The first is a woman credited with being the mother of American sportswear, Claire McCardell. And the second is a textile designer named Dorothy Liebes, proclaimed by the publication Interiors to be the greatest modern weaver and the mother of the 20th century palette. And I, in fact, could go on and on with all of the accolades that have been piled onto these two women, but I think the ones that I've mentioned are sort of at the top of the list. So the impact of these two women was widely acknowledged during their lifetimes, but somehow, for some inexplicable reason, their names, their work, have fallen into a bit of obscurity. Thankfully, however, this might actually be about to change. There are two major exhibitions planned of their work that are slated to open in the near future. So we can look forward to hearing more about these two women. And now you'll have some, background information to go into those exhibitions, or when you hear about them, you'll recognize those names. So I have to admit that initially I chose fashion designer Claire McCardell and weaver Dorothy Liebes, because they're well represented in our collection. But if I'm being completely honest, I also chose them because I love their work. And you can't see it right now, but I am wearing my Dorothy Liebes inspired shoes this evening while I give you this presentation. However, beyond shoes, beyond all of that, as I began diving back into their careers, as I was preparing for this presentation, I actually came to realize that there were stronger connections between the two, more than just, my personal affinity for their designs. Of course, as I mentioned, they were contemporaries of one another, both working in the mid-20th century, but it really does go beyond that. Both of these women had to advocate for themselves in a design world that was largely dominated by men. And maybe it was their own struggle and eventual success that made them feel very strongly about advocating for other women. Through my study of these two women, McCardell and Liebes, names of other women just kept popping up all over the place, common to both of them. Women whose names were women who were not so well known during their careers, but who Liebes and McCardell, who inspired them, who was doing good work, who Liebes and McCardell wanted to work with or were working with. And the most prominent thread that connected these two was how similar their design philosophies were. Liebes and McCardell were working in their chosen mediums of textiles and fashion, but they believed that design should be for everyone, not just the elite few who could afford it. So this evening, in addition to diving into the lives of these two women, we'll follow their lead for a moment and celebrate other women makers and designers whose work is represented in the costume and textile collection, those named and unnamed women in the 20th century and beyond. So I'm showing you 3 examples of the very many that we have in the textile and costume collection. In the upper left-hand corner, you have Tamis Keefe, who, interestingly enough, early in her career, worked in Dorothy Liebes' studio in San Francisco. And Tamis Keefe, you're seeing here a handkerchief design that she did. And she worked a lot in that medium. We have a number of handkerchiefs that were designed by Tamis Keefe. In the center of the slide, you're seeing a sweater that was designed by a woman who was known as the Queen of Knitwear, Sonia Riquiel. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you're seeing a textile design, a plan for a textile, by the very talented Edna Leonhardt. And while we only have, so much time this evening, and our time is short this evening, I wanted to take a moment to direct you to the blog that the Textile and Costume Collection has created. And you're seeing its web address there at the top of the page, followthethreadblog.com. And so if you go there and type in any of these women's name, you can actually learn more about each of them, because each of them has an amazing story to tell. So I wanted to make sure that you, at the end of this presentation, during it, are knowing, given the tools so that you can know how to access our collection. I would also be remiss, I have to say this, in not acknowledging another woman whose help, without her help, this blog wouldn't exist. My colleague, my friend, Ann Wilson, whose tech expertise and design expertise, really, without that, this blog would not exist. So thank you to Anne. So our collection holds stories of some women who, until I pull that lid off the box and dig into that tissue paper, have been completely forgotten. Such was the case with the woman you see on this slide, Miss Sarah Epence. She, along with her business partner, Kate Irwin, made the gorgeous dress trimmed with ostrich feathers and embroidery that you're seeing here on this slide. They owned and ran their own high-end dressmaking shop in Pittsburgh at the end of the 19th century. And I truly believe that before this ensemble came out of its box, that very few people, if any, had spoken these two women's names for nearly a century. And then, of course, there are the boxes I open where the invisible hand of women whose names I'll unfortunately never know are evident. the women who made the objects that were in it not for the recognition, but simply because their family needed clothes just to put on their backs. So I wanted to sort of bring our attention to all of these stories that exist in the textile and costume collection. So, although it's not a name that might be familiar to you, you've no doubt benefited from Claire McCardell's impact on fashion. And for those who do know her, she holds a very special place. And she's certainly one of my favorite designers. As I mentioned earlier, Claire McCardell is considered to be the mother of American sportswear. Without McCardell, there might not have been a Donna Karan or a Calvin Klein or a Ralph Lauren or any other designer who makes their bread and butter in sportswear. McCardell designed clothes with a relaxed sensibility that were appropriate for a wide range of activities. Her clothes were focused on flexibility, practicality, and comfort. And I'll add to that list, affordability. Valerie Steele, who is the curator at the museum at FIT, credits McCardell as being, quote, the founder of democratic American fashion, end quote. McCardell's clothes were mass-produced and within the reach of the average woman. And now this is a time, right, the late 1930s, 40s, 50s. And this was at a time when fashion, with a capital F, meant the likes of, you know, your Christian Dior, your Cristobal Balenciaga, Hubert de Givenchy. McCardell felt strongly that the average woman, the working woman, the housewife, deserved to wear attractive clothes at a reasonable price. Her clothes were designed for the every woman. Actually, Claire was just designing clothes that she wanted to wear. Claire McCardell was born in Frederick, Maryland, and grew up with 3 younger brothers. And she talks in later life about spending a lot of time outdoors, you know, running around, climbing trees, and doing all sorts of activities that were, you know, maybe considered a little bit unladylike at the time she was alive. And she kept this childhood in mind when she transitioned to be a fashion designer later in life. She designed garments and fabrics that could stand up to whatever activity a woman might be called to do. She gravitated towards natural fabrics such as cotton, denim, wool, and always key in her fabric choices, washability. McCardell left Maryland and eventually found her way to Parsons School of Design in New York City, where she studied fashion. And she spent some time abroad in Paris during her time at school. And then after graduating, she entered the world of fashion in New York City. And I'll pause for a moment and just sort of paint a picture of what fashion in New York City was like during the time that she started work. If you found yourself in American fashion during the early 20th century, your job consisted not in designing original garments, but rather in traveling to Paris or London, taking in these fantastic, amazing couture runway shows, sketching what you saw as quickly as you could, bringing those sketches back to the company you worked for in the United States and passing them along so that they could be copied and knocked off as quickly as possible. And this is how McCardell spent her early days in fashion. And she hated it. She absolutely hated it. She knew that there were designers whose talents were being completely wasted by simply copying what someone else was doing, and she certainly was one of those. When I first started here at the Textile and Costume Collection, I was ecstatic to find that we housed 13, it was like my dream come true, 13 McCardell pieces. And as we've learned recently in our digitization process, 10 of these pieces, actually the 10 you're seeing on the screen here, belong to the luckiest lady in Philadelphia. And they were actually part of her bridal trousseau when she was married in, I believe it was 1950. And here you're seeing a close-up of one of these dresses from that trousseau. It represents a style of dress that McCardell created near the beginning of her career. And it really propelled her forward in the world of fashion. And this is a style that she would come back to over and over again over the course of her career. And it was referred to as the monastic dress. So this dress that I'm showing you on the screen here, it's not just this one dress, it's the idea of a dress. And what that meant was this sort of loose, unfitted, style it yourself silhouette. On its debut in 1938, the monastic dress was sold for $29.95. And if you factor in inflation and all of that, that's about $300 in today's money. And the company selling it was called Best & Co. And they sold out their order of 100 dresses. That's all they had ordered. And they sold all those dresses out in one day. So again, back to this monastic idea, this sort of unfitted silhouette. It's certainly a hallmark of McCardell's work, this waistline that can be adjusted to individual specifications. So whatever size you are, whatever shape you are, making it so that it's flattering to your body. And she did that through the use of belts or ties. And you can maybe just make out the two ties that are hanging down on either side of that dress as it's sort of cinched on the left-hand side of the screen, and then the cinching of it that's happening with those ties wrapping around the waist. The fashion industry took to calling this style, as I've mentioned, the monastic, because it was, according to publicity at the time, quote, as simple as a monk's cassock, end quote. And, with this sort of shape it yourself idea, the shape it yourself quality of the monastic dress, Claire presented a solution to the challenge of fit in this push during the mid-20th century towards mass-produced garments. After the dress's initial success, Best & Co., who must have placed additional orders for more dresses, took out full-page ads in New York City papers proclaiming, quote, once or twice a decade, a history-making style appears. It fits everyone. No alteration is necessary except its length, and it's as appropriate above a typewriter as a tea table, end quote. There are certain details, silhouettes, or techniques that emerge over and over again over the course of McCardell's career in fashion. And these details are referred to as McCarthylisms. And you're seeing a couple examples of that here in this, again, another dress from that wedding trousseau. So all of the women listening tonight will have a pair of pants or a skirt that have pockets so frustratingly small that you wonder why did they even bother? McCardell took inspiration for her pockets from roomy pockets that she was seeing in menswear. And so all of her pockets are functional. You can actually fit your whole hand into them. And all of the pieces that we have pockets. And you're seeing the pocket sort of on the other side of the zipper on the right-hand side of the screen underneath the sleeve here. Speaking of zippers, it's another one of those McCarthylisms, specifically where she placed the zippers. So if a garment designed by McCardell fastened with a zipper, it was always in the side seam, as seen in this dress. And she was thinking about the acrobatics that would have been necessary for a single woman zipping something at the center back. Hooks and eyes, which are usually a functional aspect in a garment, but with McCardell, they become this wonderful decorative focal point, as we see here at the center front of this dress with these brass sort of hooks and eyes visible on the exterior. And another reason that I love not only McCardell's clothes, but her overall approach to dress and aesthetics was that this dress and all of her garments, in fact, were intended to be worn with flats, never heels. McCardell personally objected to heels. So McCardell had started working for this company, Townley, in 1932, and you're seeing the label here. And Claire, ever intent on pushing fashion forward in a new direction, ran into some resistance with the modern style garments she was creating that were markedly less fussy than what most of fashion was pushing. And Adolph Klein, who would actually become a partner at Townley later on, referred to McCardell's clothes as, quote, some damned weird stuff, end quote. So McCardell was not only creating amazing garments and modern cuts that women wanted to wear, but based on what I've learned about her, she knew her value and was willing to stick up for herself in a fashion world that, kind of as that quote suggests, wasn't always ready for what she was serving. It was actually rare in the early to mid 20th century for American designers to get their name on the labels of garments they created. It was usually the name of the company that was selling the garments. But after the success of the monastic dress, Claire asked her boss at Townley to put her name on the label. He refused at the time. And fast forward a few years later to a period of financial difficulty for Townley, they actually closed their doors. And when they reopened, they asked McCardell to come and work as the head designer. And she said, all right, you're putting my name on that label. And so hers was one of the first names to appear on the label of an American fashion brand. Tragically, McCardell passed away at the height of her success in 1958 from colon cancer. And in a testament to not only her great talent as a designer, but also her, what seems like her decency as a person, her memorials were packed with people she had worked with. The tributes to her rolled in and honored the life and work of this remarkable woman. McCardell didn't only put her name on the Townley labels. On a number of the pieces, we have a name indicating the company or individual designer who created the fabric are noted. And while I will say that the names of fabric manufacturers were more commonly known and advertised in the mid-20th century, it's still pretty remarkable that she did that. And while, as far as I know, McCardell never used any fabric designed or created by Dorothy Liebes in her garments, other fashion designers, Bonnie Cashin, Gilbert Adrian, and Pauline Trégère, which are all designers that are represented in our collection, but not in Liebes fabrics, did. But the impact of Dorothy Liebes goes well beyond fashion. Among many other titles conferred on her, Dorothy Liebes was known as the First Lady of the Loom. Dorothy Wright was born in 1897 in Guerneville, California. She earned her bachelor's degree in applied design at the University of California, Berkeley in 1923, and a master's degree from Teachers College of Columbia. It is said that she got into the textile business because one of her teachers told her that her paintings looked like fabric, and so she spent a summer learning to weave in Chicago. After she finished her degrees, she traveled to Paris, where she worked for a time as a textile designer. But she eventually returned to the United States, where she landed in San Francisco and set up shop producing custom pieces for exclusive clientele. And the types of textiles that she was making were those for interiors, architectural textiles. And many of our larger Liebes pieces of her work are testament to this. They're wall hangings, panels, room dividers and screens, upholstery fabrics, and window treatments. Dorothy Liebes designed for the likes of Doris Duke's Shangri-La, the Persian Room at the Plaza Hotel, the United Nations Delegates Dining Room, and maybe the most immediately recognizable name to us for Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece of architecture, Taliesin. And here's a funny story. I've got a funny story about how Liebes and Wright met. The beginning of their relationship, as it were. So she had been at her textile studio in San Francisco, and she received a telephone call telling her that Frank Lloyd Wright was on his way over, and Liebes thinking that he would be appalled at what he saw. She believed that their design aesthetics were basically polar opposites of one another. She kind of got out as fast as she could. And so from her hideout, I think she'd gone back to either her hotel or apartment. She received a phone call, and the person on the other end said, "You've got to get back down here. He's ordering everything in sight." And so from that point on, they had a pretty rich relationship until he passed away. Dorothy Liebes's work was characterized by its vivid colors, lush textures, and unorthodox combination of materials, which when combined in one of her textiles became known as the Liebes look. She had spent time in Guatemala early in her career and was heavily influenced by the rich color combinations of the pre-Columbian textiles she found there. And the variety of materials that she used, I mean, it's almost easier for me to speak about what she didn't use. Metal, ticker tape, sequins, glass yarn, leather, which you're seeing here, bamboo, cellophane, treated leathers, lacquered plastics. I mean, the list goes on and on. The use of these kind of unconventional materials at first was driven absolutely by frugality. But after World War II, when man-made textiles came onto the market, instead of being requisitioned for war use, companies like DuPont hired her as a consultant and used her name to sell their new products to skeptical customers. And Liebes worked with the company Beckmans, a company that eventually became part of Dow Chemical. And she was their official spokesperson and stylist for their new laminated metallic yarn called Lurex. In the early 1950s, she began to transition her studio from San Francisco to New York City. And there she produced prototypes for industry. The majority of our Liebes pieces are these prototypes, these samples where she and her team of designers and weavers tried things out and learned what worked and what didn't work. And in my research, I saw it noted that at the height of her career, she produced around 2,500 samples. And I'd say in our collection, we have probably about a year and a half worth of those samples. And it was during this time that she began to turn away from custom design work to mass production, with the goal of making good design accessible to all. She really wanted to give the average American the opportunity to be involved in the modern design movement. So her hand-woven samples were translated into power-loomed fabrics. And one of the ways she shifted architectural fabrics was through her use in making and creation of window blinds. I mean, mid-century houses are in large part characterized by their broad, expansive windows. And Liebes continued her use of unconventional materials as she created these blinds. For these large window spans, she also needed wider looms, and that's what you're seeing in this image here. This one came equipped with a sliding seat to accommodate the effort it would take to pass the weft through the open shed of the warp. So it was on my radar that Dorothy Liebes dabbled in textile design for auto interiors, but I'm thrilled to report my most recent discovery related to this. Truly, this is hot off the presses news as I just stumbled across this weekend. So Liebes was one of the few women involved in the auto industry at the time, and she worked on this beautiful car you're seeing here. I almost love classic cars as much as I love old textiles and clothes. So here is Chrysler's 1957 Plymouth Fury. And as I was flipping through our recently digitized images of her work, trying to narrow down which ones I was going to show you tonight, I came across this swatch, and I've zoomed in on the text written below it so you can see that in the upper right-hand corner. So, because of that note, I instantly Googled 1957 Plymouth Fury original interior, and I definitely think there are some similarities. And so to really, sort of test my hypothesis, bring this full circle, I think that it's only fair that if anyone out there listening tonight has a 1957 Plymouth Fury with original interiors, that you should let me borrow it, I mean, for study purposes. I mean, I probably will have to drive it a couple of times, just lend it to me for a month or so, and I'll inspect it, I'll drive it around, and I will verify whether those interiors are in fact designed by Dorothy Liebes. The pieces in our Dorothy Liebes archive are hands down our most requested pieces. I bring them out multiple times a semester because once the students learn about them, they can't get enough. It's her use of unconventional materials that I think really catches their attention, as sustainability has become a huge part of fashion and textiles recently. Liebes's pieces show that using what you have around you, whatever it might be, can result in really beautiful fabrics. And I think Liebes would be thrilled that her textile samples are still inspiring students 50 years after her death. A consummate teacher, she was trained as an art teacher. She was always fostering the next generation by working with them and passing along her experiences and ideas. I mean, I really could go on, but I bet Roberta wants me to stop so that I can take some questions. But I wanted to leave you with some resources. I mentioned the blog before. This site that you're seeing here, which starts with JSTOR, is our online digital platform, and you're seeing the main page of it here, where you can type in Dorothy Liebes or Claire McCardell, see those images, or just scroll through and look to your heart's content. So I will leave it at that and say thank you so much for joining me this evening and listening, and I look forward to hearing whatever questions you might have. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see us in full screen.
Jade, thank you so much. That was so impressive to see the pieces and to hear the backstories behind these incredible women, and hearing that they're contemporaries, you know, around the same time, facing some of the same similar things. I feel like it's a really small world, and this really helped, you know, show that. But thank you so much. As a reminder to everybody, we are taking your questions, so go ahead and submit those using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can in the next 10 minutes or so. But to get us started, we had a few that were submitted through our registration form, so thank you for doing that. And one of those, you know, these women had amazing education and background, and, you know, Jefferson has such a history of, you know, educating some amazing textile designers and fashion designers. And what our alumni are curious, what are the programs like now? Are they similar to what they were in the past? You know, as a professor, what are some of the majors that you see there?
Yeah, we have an amazing fashion design program. We have an amazing textile design program. Both of those programs have both undergraduate and graduate options. What's really fantastic about the textile design program, well, there are many things, but one of the things that's so great about it is that, you know, some of the looms that they're using to weave on are some of the pieces that were being woven on by, you know, the people when this university started. So they're really carrying forward that legacy, both in the fashion design and the textile design. And those are the students I teach in my classes. But what I think is really great about our collection is that I have students from all disciplines who come in, who are interested in seeing these and who help me look at these pieces through a different light. Because, you know, if an architecture student comes in, they see something different. If a student comes in from graphic design, they see something different. So it's really just adding to the richness that this collection can provide to our students and our faculty.
Fantastic. Great to see that legacy continue and see that. Next question, how can we donate to your collection?
This is a question I always get, and I will absolutely say that most of the objects that you saw tonight, and most of those, you know, 100,000 objects that we have, are here because of the goodwill, the kindness of our community. They're 98% of the things that we have are donated. So that being said, we have a lot of stuff. And so we have to be very careful about what we take. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't take donations, but I'm just picky because I want to make sure that what I take in, I can care for well. So if you are interested in donating something, usually good, give me a cell phone, you know, sort of picture of it, and you can send that to my email, which was up on that last screen, and I'm sure Roberta will make available to you as well.
Yes, we'll be sure to share your contact information and your blog, website, and all of that as well in the post follow-up materials. That's great to know. So we can definitely explore donating materials.
Yes.
Does the Textile and Costumes collection, do you have a fund that we can donate towards monetarily?
Oh, Roberta, that is an excellent question. And I wish that there was an easy answer for that. Because we do. Well, we don't have a fund that I can direct you to, but if you are considering if that is an idea or a thought you have, that would be very welcome, because we need funds to continue this work that we're doing in preserving and digitizing. So if anybody is thinking in that direction, probably the best thing to do would be, again, just to reach out through an email to me, and I promise, if that's the direction you're thinking, I'll make it as easy as I possibly can.
Sounds good. That's great. So we heard about how many pieces are in this amazing collection. 6,000 have been digitized already. That's really impressive. Have you noticed, is there any gap that you've noticed that you're like, oh man, I really wish we had something like this? Or does that help, you think about in the future where you want to go?
Yeah. And it helps me sort of, if people come in with donations, like, okay, well, I will take this, whereas I have 20 copies of this already. So I would say that our collection, we have some menswear. We'll give the men a little shout out here. We have some menswear in our collection, but it is a smaller aspect of our collection. We're really rich in the holdings of our 19th century and sort of early mid 20th century women's garments. But if anybody's got anything older than that, I will definitely talk to you. And then, of course, we're always looking to sort of fill our gaps, and we didn't even get to touch on this at all, of garments and textiles from around the world. We have a really rich collection of things from all over the world, and hoping in the future to get that more out in the front. So yeah, we do have some holes.
Okay, that's wonderful. So there's definitely opportunity there. And, we talked a little bit about the most contemporary piece, the oldest piece. Would you say that Egyptian piece is the most valuable? Is that what you would consider the most valuable out of the collection?
Well, it's tough because you have to sort of think about what does value mean? Because there's monetary value, and then the sort of significance as into its rarity, or maybe even value in that, what can it provide for our students that other pieces can't? And certainly that fragment, that Egyptian fragment, is valuable because it is amongst a group of other fragments that sort of show some of the earliest and amazing weaving that's happening. One of the other valuable pieces that we have is a textile that has at the center of it the first example of printing on fabric that was done here in the United States by a man whose name was John Hewson, who was an Englishman brought over to Philadelphia by Ben Franklin. So we have some really, our pieces are valuable to Philadelphia, to the founding of this nation, we sort of hold a lot of different legacies, all in one building.
All in one building. It's just packed full of some really interesting things. I'm so excited to look online to see even more of those pieces. So thank you for putting those there. A question about how you ended up with so many Dorothy Liebes pieces.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So after she passed, there was just this mountain, I think, of samples of work at her studio. And from what I understand, because I'm sort of standing on the shoulders of other researchers here, that work was dispersed to a variety of different institutions, museums, universities, colleges. And we were fortunate enough to be on the receiving end of that. I think our reputation as a sort of textile training, our textile training program, and the fact that we have and we had faculty that not only teach but work in industry, that when these companies, these manufacturers shut down and they had this fabric sort of legacy library, not wanting to just throw it away, they were like, let's give it to these people. They'll help preserve it. So I don't have any more specifics than that. I've tried to ask, like, where did we get these? How did we get these? When did we get these? Those are still unanswered questions.
I'm sure they'll go that way for a little while, right?
Yes, they will.
Maybe you'll have an amazing alumni come back and they'll come share, our family gave you these items. Who knows?
Yeah. That's the wonderful thing about doing events like this is like people who, have information that can fill in those gaps and help sort of restore that story.
For sure. So a question about Claire McCardell, the collection that we have from her. Who was the bride who owned the 10-piece trousseau?
Oh, she's a woman who was from here in Philadelphia. And she was, I haven't been able to find out a lot of information about her, thanks to Google. But she was a well-educated and very well-written woman. She wrote a book. I found a title. It was about something and the pre-Raphaelites. So I kind of, just making an assumption, her sort of aesthetic in studying pre-Raphaelite art and sort of that sort of dress reform and aesthetic dress kind of makes sense when you think about, she might be drawn to Claire McCardell's work. It's also interesting because all of the pieces that she had, the 10 pieces from her trousseau, were altered. So the hems were dropped because, she was apparently a little taller than those dresses, came out of the factory as being. So she needed to lengthen them.
There you go. Tailored a little bit to each silhouette. I like that. Yeah, we have others that are equally fans of Claire McCardell's silhouettes. And actually one of them, she was interested in learning more about your necklace. She was sending you praise for your necklace. She's like, well, who designed that? And do you have a Dorothy Liebes textile in behind you? What's up with the textile?
Oh, okay. Well, so I have no idea who designed my necklace, and I did not make it. I'm a collector of sort of big chunky necklaces. That's kind of my thing. But the textile behind me is not Dorothy Liebes. It's a sort of, I think it's a South American ikat. So a big woven textile that actually was sort of pulled out of storage. And we've got a couple of these hanging on the wall. So I get to have it in my office. It's great decoration.
Yeah, I would take it. That's wonderful. All right. And I really like this question. Can you tell us about a particular aha moment that a student experienced when handling an artifact and then potentially used that as like design inspiration or maybe discovering, something in a box that wasn't, you didn't know about before?
Yeah. So recently, and actually, no, this happens a lot. I was talking to one of my classes, and we were talking about, how we've never lived in a world that didn't include plastics, and how when we look at the world of garments and fashion textiles before plastics, we have to think about like, well, what were those materials made out of? Oh my gosh, that was real tortoise shell. Oh my goodness. That button isn't plastic, that's mother of pearl. Well, what is mother of pearl? And where did it come from? And how did it get, created into a button? And so those kind of moments are always fun to just sort of like introduce students to things that they hadn't thought about, that they wouldn't have necessarily the opportunity to think about. And then a discovery that I personally made recently. I lifted the lid on a box and I was by myself in a room, but I made this like out loud exclamation because I'm fairly nerdy. But it was one of the first zippers ever invented. So this would be 1902, 1905. And this zipper, the teeth on it, they look like, the jaws of some fierce carnivore, the way that the sort of zipper works. And I'd never seen anything like that before. So that was really something incredible to see.
There we go. We get a little picture of your daily exploration.
I'm so spoiled. I'm so spoiled. I get to see all this stuff.
So something to wrap up tonight, and feel free to decline, but we have some interest in your shoes.
Oh,
Are you willing to show us your shoes?
Okay.
This is where Zoom is hard. Oh, look at those.
Okay, you got to sort of disregard my socks, but like, there we go. Those are my shoes. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't fall over.
You saw it here on Zoom. Here we go. We get the full picture.
I guess I could have just taken off my shoe really quick, but no, I made it more difficult on myself.
That comes from our good friend, Marsha Weiss. So
thanks, Marsha.
Wonderful.
Marsha, you can get your own pair.
This is wonderful. Well, that actually wraps up all of our questions. So, thank you so much, Jade, for sharing your presentation with us and walking us through a little bit of your work with you and your team at the Textile and Costumes Collection here at Jefferson. It's amazing to see what you all are doing. So thank you so much. Just before we wrap up tonight, I want to share a couple of closing announcements with you all. So on the screen, you can see we have a number of some really wonderful programs coming to you in person and online as well. So you can check out some of these programs and others as well at jefferson.edu/alumni events. A little plug, we have Jefferson Giving Day. So if you were one of those people interested in giving, make sure you contact Jade at the email I'll provide you tomorrow, and you can find out how to do that there. Also on the screen, you'll see our Jefferson Alumni Network. So if you haven't created your profile, please do so by scanning the QR code on the screen or going to alumninetwork.jefferson.edu. And we will be sending you a link to tonight's recording tomorrow, so you can watch this back if you're interested, or you can share with your network. So with that, that's everything for tonight. Thank you again for joining us. It was such a pleasure to learn about some of these pieces, and we hope to see you all again soon. Take care. Bye.